My name was supposed to have been Victoria. Norman and Elizabeth Brown were not the sort of people who like pretentious or trendy names for their children, but they did have a sense of humour. Their son was named Robert, but they called him Bobby, something that was entirely missed in the wizarding world, though the Muggleborns and Half-Bloods generally got it. I was to have been named Victoria, a play on the venerated Queen's nickname, but the moment I opened my eyes that changed. I liked it, but what I liked most was when my father sang to me at night. Lavender brown, lavender dear, when you are down I will be here. I had a terrible weakness for freckles. The first boy I'd ever had a crush on had been Charlie Weasley when I was 6 and my parents took me to Hogwarts to watch Bobby's first Quidditch championship. We got to meet the whole team, and I was so enamoured of the charming, laughing, impossibly grown-up keeper that I spent the entire time peeking shyly from behind my mother's robes. It had turned into an elaborate several-year game of pretend with Parvati, in which we were very famous and glamorous, why exactly changed weekly, and married respectively to Charlie Weasley and Sanjay Dutt. We did grow out of it before we got to school, though I could never look at freckled boy without getting a bit weak-kneed, and I was grateful only Parvati knew about that during 6th year. The whole thing with Ron was fiasco enough on its own. Parvati and I knew Lockhart was hiding something. The first time we saw Lockhart's huge, glossy poster hanging in the front window of Flourish and Blots, Parvati had roundly declared him to be a poof. Her salient point at the time had been that he was clearly sporting more hair care potions than the two of us combined, and I had agreed with a flaming read-aloud introduction to Magical Me that had nearly caused my friend to choke to death laughing. From then on, it became a running joke between us, although as the year went on, we were more and more certain that the joke of finding subtext and innuendo in every self-aggrandizing word and flamboyant gesture was perhaps accurate. He was definitely hiding something. Whether it had anything to do with the petal-pink robes aged in lilac lace that had brought us to tears in our 3rd lesson, well, we'd never know. I was an excellent mimic. My family discovered this, much to their embarrassment, when I was less than 2 years old. I answered, "What does a dragon say, and what does a kitty say?" just fine, but "What does Mummy say?" was supposed to have been "I love you," not "Fuck, oops, I mean drat." Though I had a better idea of what I was saying later, my talent for voices and accents only grew. Mostly it was just amusing, but on several occasions the DA found my spot-on imitation of Alecto Caro good enough to fool simple voice recognition spells, and particularly adept for official announcements, to be extremely useful. I kept a diary every day since I was 8 years old. I had one for every year. They were locked in every way I knew, because in them I held nothing back. Hopes, fears, random musings, even a phase of truly wretched poetry. I showed them to absolutely no one, even my mother or Parvati. After I was older, there were some parts of ages 12 to 14 I almost destroyed, but I was glad I didn't, because even if they were at times humiliating, they were still a record of who I was and who I had been. Sometimes, in my 7th year, I would look back on old entries and scarcely recognize myself. Had I once honestly considered suicide because Michael Corner had laughed at me for mispronouncing a spell in 3rd year, just because he was cute? But then again, I sort of missed that ridiculous drama. It was easier not to think about what it would be like to look back on the entry for the first time I saw someone cruciated. Or the first time I was. I had a matchmaker streak a mile wide. It was nosy, it was gossipy, it got me in trouble over and over again for putting my nose in where it didn't belong, and I honestly hated being caught in the middle when things went pear-shaped, but I couldn't help it. I wasn't so much a romantic as I really liked seeing people happy, and I constantly found myself analysing my classmates and deciding who really should be with who. And that led all too often to trying to set them off, which led, all too often, to discovering that I really hadn't known them that well to begin with. Sure, they were just darling together, but how had I missed that Dean was gay, when he'd been first so hesitant, then so oddly eager to try going with Ginny? And it was really just best not to think about Vic and Jimmy. It had taken them months to start speaking to one another again, and they never really forgave me. I love Muggle movies. Parvati had introduced me to them as a means of explaining the tortured gorgeousness that was Sanjay Dutt. And even if the subtitles were a bit awkward, I loved the swirling costumes and vivid colours, the melodramatic music and dances that anchored the hundreds of sleepovers. It wasn't until the summer of 5th year that we discovered horror movies together, but those quickly became my favourite. I loved a good scare, We loved daring each other to watch the gory parts without closing our eyes or peeping between fingers, but just as much fun as the clutching and screaming was trying to outdo one another with smart aleck comments about the laughable way Muggles portrayed creatures like werewolves, ghosts, and vampires. I loved to flirt with anything that moved. I knew perfectly well that I was definitely one of the prettiest, if not arguably the prettiest girl in my year, and it struck me as a lot more ridiculous to pretend otherwise in some kind of false modesty. Besides, it was, if I would admit it, quite the power trip to be able to make the boys, and even some of the girls, forget their own names, drop books, and even walk into walls by just putting your leg up on the chair just so to adjust your sock, by running your hand through your hair that way, or doing that to the end of your quill like you didn't even know it. And when they flirted back, it was even better. The silent give and take of smiles and looks that was its own form of banter that could be so much wittier than most people gave credit for. I only dated 3 boys. Seamus Finnegan took me to the Yule Ball, then I dated Justin Finch Fletchley for a few months in 5th year, but although I'd long stopped caring that I was called all sorts of names for just being a flirt, I didn't like it when Galleon Digger was added to that list, even if I pointed out to several people that I was seeing entirely the wrong member of the Hufflepuff trio for that. And then there was the Ron mess, and a few weeks with Seamus again. But still, if you believe rumour, there wasn't a boy, girl, ghost, or house elf I hadn't at least heartily snogged. I never thought I'd be grateful for that, but thankfully some people were stupid enough to believe rumour when I warned them that I was carrying